All right, so today we're going to look into something pretty intense. We're going to be talking about how to survive a war as a civilian. We've got quite the stack of survival guides and expert opinions to pull from today.
Yeah, everything from like how to prepare for war as a civilian, from prepping planet all the way to urban survival in times of war as a civilian, from TRD-CRFT.
It's a pretty fascinating look into a world that hopefully we'll never have to actually experience.
Yeah, it's a bit unsettling, but as these sources emphasize, conflict can arise, like, unexpectedly.
Yeah.
And being prepared, both mentally and practically can really make a huge difference.
Absolutely. And the first thing that pops into my head anyway when I think about war breaking out is, well, how do I figure out my own risk level?
Right.
And a couple articles from Military Modeling, both titled, How to Prepare for War as a Civilian, ?
Yeah.
From 2023 really highlighted this.
Yeah, they stress that it's not just about how close you are to a conflict zone.
Right.
There are other factors at play, like
your citizenship, your occupation.
Oh, that's interesting.
If you think about it, like those who are in healthcare or emergency services, they're going to be in really high demand, putting them in a very unique position.
Yeah, those essential workers, those folks are going to be right on the front lines, even if they're not soldiers.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's a different kind of risk there. Now, once you've assessed your risk, the big question is stay or go.
Bug in or bug out.
Right.
As the survivalists like to say.
Yeah, it seems like every guide has a different opinion on this, but Survival Sullivan sums it up pretty perfectly. The answer really is, it depends.
Yeah, I hate that answer.
Yeah, it's not very satisfying.
No.
But they make a great point that you need to be prepared for both.
Right.
Because war zones are super volatile. Things can change very quickly.
Yeah. Prepping Planet took a much more, let's say, proactive approach.
Yeah.
They basically said that by the time a government issues an evacuation order, it might be too late.
Oh, wow.
So that's a chilling thought. Makes you want to think about those early warning signs very seriously.
Yeah, absolutely.
Plan ahead. So let's say you decide to stay put.
Okay.
Survival Sullivan gets very specific on fortifying your home.
Yeah.
And it's not just about having a safe room. It's about reinforcing your home security.
Right.
Can you board up your windows? Can you create alternate escape routes?
Yeah, and then there's also the whole stockpiling thing.
Oh my gosh.
Survival Sullivan suggests at least 6 months worth of food, water, all the other essentials you can think of.
It seems like a lot, but you never know how long those supply chains could be disrupted for.
Exactly. That's the key takeaway here, is self-sufficiency.
Right.
During wartime, you can't depend on supermarkets or deliveries.
Right.
You're responsible for your own survival, and that means thinking long term.
Yeah, 6 months seems excessive in the moment, but if you're in it, you're going to be grateful for every single can of beans.
Every last one.
So we talked about bugging in, but what if you decide to evacuate? Survival Sullivan, Prepping Planet, even TRD-CRFT.
Yeah.
They all emphasize having multiple escape routes.
Yeah, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
And it's not just about having a map.
Right.
Thinking about the logistics, like fuel, how reliable is your vehicle? Are there going to be any potential roadblocks?
Oh, yeah.
Huge traffic jams.
I always think about those disaster movies when everyone's trying to get out at once.
TRD-CRFT even suggested practicing your evacuation route in advance.
Like a fire drill.
Exactly.
But for fleeing a war zone.
Exactly.
So speaking of essentials, let's shift gears and talk about what you need to survive.
Okay.
And I'm not talking about like your favorite streaming service password.
Although entertainment and mental stimulation are important for morale, we're going to be talking about the obvious things like food, water, first aid.
Right.
But these sources go a little bit deeper into like what it really takes to make it long term.
Survival Sullivan and TRD-CRFT both really stressed water purification.
Yeah.
Clean water is just non-negotiable.
Yeah. Bottled water runs out. You got to think about how you're going to purify water. Do you have a filter? Do you have boiling tablets?
Yeah.
Some other method.
It's like having backup systems for your backup systems.
Yeah. It's all about redundancy.
Redundancy.
Yeah.
Okay. Water purification. Check.
Check.
Now, what about other essential gear?
Survival Sullivan had an interesting point. Don't forget a can opener.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one.
Seems basic, but, all those canned goods you stockpiled,
right?
Kind of useless without it.
Totally useless. And let's talk about first aid.
Yeah, they, along with WikiHow, strongly advise going beyond the basic kit.
Okay.
Learning some basic trauma care bandaging techniques.
So you're like your own first responder.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And when access to medical professionals is limited, those skills could save a life.
Yeah, and it's not just about treating physical injuries.
Right.
It's also about maintaining hygiene.
Yes, very important.
Yeah.
WikiHow and TRDC-RFT both highlight this. It might seem minor, but soap, sanitizer, toilet paper.
Oh, yeah.
These become disease prevention tools.
It's all about your well-being, especially when you're in a very stressful, chaotic environment.
Absolutely.
Right, hygiene.
Check.
Check. Okay, now for the topic I know you've been waiting for,
Yeah.
self-defense and weapons.
This is where things get a little complicated.
Yeah, definitely. It's a sensitive topic.
Yeah, Survival Sullivan addresses it head on, points out the dilemma of carrying a firearm. You know, on the one hand, it gives you protection, but it also potentially makes you a target for both sides.
Right.
You're signaling that you're armed, and that can attract unwanted attention. Doesn't matter what your intentions are.
So it's like this risk-reward calculation.
Right.
So what's the advice if you do choose to arm yourself?
They suggest prioritizing concealment,
Okay.
opting for handguns or non-lethal options like pepper spray.
Right.
But they really emphasize that the weapon itself is only part of the equation. You've got to learn basic self-defense, escape techniques. So be resourceful.
Yeah, using everyday objects as weapons even.
Wow.
It's really about empowering yourself with a range of skills and knowledge.
You know, speaking of knowledge,
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm incredibly curious about what TRDCRFT redacted from their section on self-defense.
Oh, yeah.
The section's called Dealing with Enemy Combatants, and the whole paragraph is blacked out.
Yeah, what's that about?
I don't know, what kind of advanced tactics are they privy to?
I know.
Could it be hand-to-hand combat? Strategies for disarming your opponents? Something even more covert?
I don't know, but it's intriguing.
Super intriguing.
Yeah, it speaks to a level of expertise that goes beyond the basics.
Yeah.
Like, they must know specific military protocols or techniques
Right.
that are best left undisclosed.
It's like we're a spy novel or something.
I know.
Okay, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about urban warfare.
Okay.
This is where TRDCRFT's expertise really shines.
Yeah.
They emphasize that understanding the urban landscape is key.
Yeah.
So what do they mean by that? Basically, you got to see the city through like a tactical lens,
Okay.
learning the sounds of gunfire, knowing like what weapons are being used, how close the firefight is,
Yeah, right.
knowing which areas are going to be safer, like parks and residential areas versus like government buildings or military installations.
So it's like developing this mental map of the city,
Exactly.
highlighting all the danger zones and all the escape routes.
Yeah, and they also talk about identifying key locations,
Okay.
hospitals, evacuation points, places where you might be able to find aid or shelter.
Okay.
And this is where those multiple escape routes come into play.
Yeah.
They stressed having a plan A, B, and C because in urban warfare,
Right.
things are very fluid and very chaotic, and you got to be flexible.
Yeah, you got to be able to adapt and think on your feet
Absolutely.
and improvise.
Yeah.
Totally different mindset than hunkering down in your safe house.
And that brings us to another point TRD-CRFT emphasizes is movement. In urban warfare, you can't just stay static. You got to use back alleys, avoid checkpoints, stick to the shadows.
Stay out of sight.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Minimize your profile, move with purpose, and always be prepared to retreat.
They even say to travel light and
Yeah.
in small groups.
Yeah,
Be agile. Be inconspicuous. Don't draw attention to yourself.
exactly. It's like a video game, but with real-life consequences.
Yeah. You know, it highlights the fact that surviving urban warfare really takes a unique set of skills, observation, adaptability, and a deep understanding of how to navigate the urban environment.
Absolutely.
It's a lot to take in,
It is.
you know. But there's one recurring theme that I've seen come up in all of these different sources,
Okay.
regardless of whether they're bugging in or bugging out. They all say community is important.
Yeah, WikiHow put it very well. They said that during wartime, your relationships and connections with other people, those are vital.
TRDCRFT takes it one step further.
Yeah.
They advocate for these organized community groups, assigning roles based on skills. You know, you've got your medical, your security, your logistics.
It's all about pooling resources, strategizing together.
And creating this network of support.
Absolutely.
It makes you realize that prepping isn't just about individual survival.
Right.
It's about building resilient communities.
And it's not just about practical support. It's about that human connection.
That sense of belonging.
Yeah, that becomes even more important in times of stress and uncertainty.
Absolutely. So we've covered a lot of ground here, assessing your risk, the bug in versus bug out debate, fortifying your home, stockpiling those essentials, self-defense, complexities of urban warfare, and the vital role of community.
Yeah, just scratch the surface.
Yeah.
There's so much more to explore, like the psychological and emotional toll of war,
Right.
the ethical dilemmas that arise when survival is at stake.
Yeah, before we dive into those topics, let's just take a quick pause here.
Okay.
Reflect on what we've learned so far.
Yeah.
It's a lot to process.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to acknowledge the emotional impact of this information.
Absolutely.
It can be overwhelming, even frightening.
It can be.
So what we've covered so far is really just the foundation.
Yeah.
It's about building awareness, understanding the potential challenges, starting to think critically about how you would respond in this type of situation.
And remember, knowledge is power.
Yes.
The more you know, the better equipped you are to make informed decisions, stay calm under pressure, and protect yourself and the people you care about.
Absolutely. So take a deep breath, absorb this information, and we'll come back in the next segment and delve even deeper into the complexities of surviving a war as a civilian.
Sounds good. Well, welcome back. So before the break, we were talking about the more practical elements of surviving during wartime, like fortifying your home, stockpiling supplies, and understanding the urban landscape. But now, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about something that's equally important.
Okay.
The psychological and emotional aspects of war.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in all the logistics. But at the end of the day, war is a very traumatic experience.
Yeah.
And preparing for it means addressing those mental and emotional challenges.
Absolutely. And WikiHow, TRDCRFT, and the Civil War Source all touch on this. They emphasize the importance of mental resilience.
Right.
And they suggest different strategies for coping with stress, fear, the constant threat of danger.
Yeah, what are some of those strategies? I mean, it's got to be easier said than done.
Yeah, of course.
To stay calm and rational when you've got bombs dropping around you.
All right. But there are some practical techniques that can help.
Okay.
Like mindfulness, TRDCRFT really emphasizes this.
Okay.
Taking even just a few minutes each day to focus on your breath, to be present in the moment.
Yeah.
It can really help reduce anxiety and improve your overall sense of well-being.
It's interesting that they brought up mindfulness because, you know, we always think about it in everyday life for stress reduction. But in a war zone, I mean...
Yeah, it takes on a whole new meaning. It's about finding these small moments of peace amidst the chaos.
Right.
These little anchors that can help you stay grounded.
And it's not just about these individual coping mechanisms.
Right.
It's also about connecting with loved ones.
Yeah, maintaining those social bonds, that's crucial.
Yeah, that reminds me of something that WikiHow mentioned. They said that personal relationships become even more vital during wartime.
Absolutely.
It's that sense of belonging, that shared experience.
Yeah.
It helps you get through the really tough times.
They even suggest reaching out to people that you may have lost touch with.
Oh, wow.
Strengthening those social ties before a crisis hits.
So prepping isn't just about stockpiling beans and bandages.
Right.
It's also about nurturing those human connections.
Yeah, exactly.
That can really sustain us when we need them.
It's a holistic approach to preparedness.
Okay, let's talk about another aspect of survival that I think often gets overlooked.
Okay.
The financial impact of war.
Right. Bullets and bandages aren't the only things that matter.
Yeah, war can absolutely devastate economies.
Yeah.
You got to be prepared for that as well.
Prepping Planet and military modeling, they both delve into this.
Okay.
They warn about the potential for economic collapse.
Right.
Shortages, rationing, hyperinflation.
So basically you're saying my money could be worthless overnight.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay, so besides stuffing a mattress full of cash, which isn't very practical or safe, what did they recommend?
Prepping Planet suggests diversifying your assets.
Okay.
Investing in gold and silver coins.
Things that hold their value.
Exactly. And they emphasize OPSSC.
Okay, hold on. What is OPSEC?
It's a military term that basically means keeping a low profile.
Okay.
Not drawing attention to yourself or your resources.
So in a wartime scenario, that would be like not flashing your wealth around.
Exactly.
Not broadcasting that you've been prepping.
Don't become a target.
Right. So be discreet.
Yeah.
Don't make yourself vulnerable.
Exactly.
And speaking of vulnerability, let's talk about something that's especially important for families having a plan.
Yes. Prepping Planet stresses this a lot.
Okay.
Families need to have a detailed evacuation plan, including designated meeting points in case you get separated.
So it's like a fire drill, but for war.
Exactly.
Okay.
They suggest mapping out multiple escape routes, having a communication plan,
right,
and even practicing that evacuation route as a family.
I can imagine it's especially challenging with children involved.
Oh, for sure.
Trying to keep them calm in a very terrifying situation.
Yeah. That's why having a plan and having those routines in place can be so beneficial.
Right. It's about creating a sense of normalcy
Yeah,
when everything else around you feels anything but normal.
exactly. And that brings us to another very important topic, communication.
Okay.
In a war zone, staying informed and connected is absolutely vital.
But I'm guessing our smartphones won't be much use when the cell towers are down and the internet is out.
Yeah, you're right. Survival Sullivan specifically warns against relying on cell phones.
Okay.
They recommend having radios, specifically shortwave radios, which can operate independently of traditional infrastructure.
So back to the basics.
Yeah.
Analog technology in a digital world.
It's all about redundancy,
Right.
having backup plans in case the primary system fails.
Right. And those shortwave radios are good because they can transmit over vast distances.
Exactly. So if you're separated from loved ones who are maybe in another city or another country, a shortwave radio could be your only way to connect with them.
And Survival Sullivan also mentioned that government agencies often use radio broadcasts to communicate with citizens during emergencies.
Right. So having a shortwave radio lets you stay informed about what's happening.
Okay, so shortwave radios for long-distance communication and for staying tuned in to those emergency broadcasts.
Yeah.
What about staying in touch with family members who are closer by?
For local communication, they recommend two-way radios.
Okay,
They're much more reliable than cell phones in a disrupted environment.
gotcha.
And they also emphasize having prearranged meeting points.
Like designated safe zones
Okay.
where everyone knows to gather if you get separated.
It's a simple strategy,
Yeah.
but potentially life-saving.
It gives everyone a sense of hope,
Right.
knowing that there's a plan in place, a place to reunite.
It's like those in case of emergency plans we used to have as kids.
Exactly.
Yeah, but on a much more serious scale.
Right.
Now let's talk about another essential aspect of survival.
Okay.
Staying healthy in a war zone.
Yeah, this can be incredibly challenging, especially when access to medical care is very limited or non-existent.
Hygiene becomes even more important in these situations.
Absolutely.
Okay.
WikiHow stresses maintaining basic hygiene, even when it seems like everything else is falling apart.
Yeah.
They talk about washing your hands regularly, even if it means using rainwater or other unconventional methods.
Right.
And they emphasize the importance of sanitation, especially if you're living in close quarters with other people.
Yeah. If you're in a crowded shelter or a bunker, preventing the spread of disease is super important.
Absolutely. And it's not just about preventing disease.
It's about maintaining a sense of dignity,
Yeah.
a sense of normalcy, even in the midst of chaos.
Right.
TRD-CRFT even gets into the nitty-gritty of waste disposal,
Okay.
recommending that you designate a specific area far from your shelter
Okay.
for garbage and human waste.
So even in a crisis, we got to think about the long-term impact of our actions.
Exactly. And that brings us to something that's often overlooked in these survival guides, the ethical dilemmas of war.
This is where things get really complicated.
Yeah, because in a survival situation, you're often forced to make really impossible choices.
Right.
Choices that challenge your values and your beliefs.
Do you steal food if you're starving?
Right.
Do you lie to protect your family?
Yeah.
Do you fight back, even if it means taking a life?
These are heavy questions, and there are no easy answers.
It's a reminder that war isn't just about physical survival.
Yeah.
It's also about moral survival.
Right. How do you come out of this experience with your soul intact?
That's the ultimate challenge.
It is.
To navigate these moral complexities
Yeah.
and still stay true to your values.
We've talked about the psychological and emotional toll of war, the financial impact, the importance of communication, the ethical dilemmas that arise. But now let's face the most visceral aspect of this topic.
Okay.
The actual experience of combat.
This is where things get really real.
Right.
We touched upon self-defense, but what about those moments when you're facing an active threat? Billets are flying, bombs are exploding.
Yeah.
How do you survive in that kind of environment?
It's hard to even imagine.
Yeah, most of us have never experienced that kind of violence firsthand.
Thankfully.
But
But some of our sources do offer glimpses into what it's like to be caught in a combat zone.
Okay.
Like WikiHow, for instance, has some pretty intense advice on what to do if you're in a critical confrontation.
Like what?
They even talk about the possibility of having to trick hostile troops
Okay.
or even taking over a tank.
That sounds like something straight out of an action movie.
Yeah, but in extreme situations, you have to get creative.
Yeah. You got to think outside the box.
Exactly. Survival sometimes means doing things you never thought you'd be capable of.
Right.
And WikiHow also emphasizes the importance of finding cover.
Okay.
basements, bathrooms,
Yeah.
even ditches if you're caught out in the open.
You just got to minimize your exposure to danger.
Exactly. Make yourself as small a target as possible.
Yeah, and TRDC-RFT talked about understanding the urban landscape.
Yeah.
Knowing the sounds of gunfire, identifying safe zones.
Right.
All that becomes super important in a combat situation.
You got to be hyper aware of your surroundings,
Right.
anticipate threats, and react quickly.
And sometimes TRDC-RFT said the best course of action is just to retreat.
Yeah, knowing when to run, when to hide that can mean the difference between surviving and not surviving.
It's a sobering thought that in a war zone, your life can change in an instant.
Yeah.
And all the preparation in the world might not be enough.
That's the harsh reality of war. But knowledge, awareness, and a resilient spirit can definitely increase your chances of survival.
Absolutely. And let's not forget the power of community
Yeah.
and that human connection.
Yeah. Those things can sustain us even in the darkest of times.
It's a lot to take in.
It is.
The physical dangers, the emotional strain, the ethical dilemmas. It makes you wonder how people ever recover from these experiences.
That's a good point. We've talked a lot about preparing for war, surviving the immediate crisis, but what happens after the war?
Right.
How do you rebuild your life, your community, your sense of normalcy when everything has been shattered?
Yeah, none of our sources really go into great detail about that.
No, they don't.
But it's clear that the impact of war lingers long after that last shot is fired.
The Civil War source does touch on the psychological toll of war, talking about how soldiers struggled with what we now call PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, long after the fighting had ended.
So it's not just about the physical scars.
Yeah.
It's the mental and emotional ones as well. The trauma, the loss, the moral compromises people might have had to make.
It can have lasting effects.
And it goes beyond just the individual level.
Right.
Entire communities are shattered.
Yeah.
Families are torn apart.
Yeah.
Trust is broken.
How do you even begin to rebuild after so much devastation?
It's a monumental task.
It is, yeah.
The physical rebuilding, the infrastructure,
Yeah.
the homes, the hospitals, that's just the start.
Yeah.
Then you got to address the psychological trauma,
Right.
foster reconciliation.
Create a sense of hope for the future.
And this is where I think we as a society need to be more prepared.
Yeah.
Not just for that initial crisis, but for that long and arduous process of recovery.
You're absolutely right.
It's easy to focus on those immediate needs, the food, the shelter, the medical care.
Right.
But we can't forget about that long-term support that people are going to need.
We need to be thinking about mental health resources,
Yeah.
trauma counseling, economic assistance.
Right.
All the things that will help people rebuild their lives and their communities.
It's a reminder that war isn't just about survival.
Yeah.
It's about rebuilding. It's
Yeah.
about healing.
And that's a process that can take generations.
It's a sobering thought.
It is, but I think there's also a glimmer of hope in all of this.
Okay.
Because throughout this deep dive,
Yeah.
we've seen just the incredible resilience of the human spirit.
Time and time again, these sources have emphasized the importance of community,
Yeah.
connection, human bonds
Yeah.
that help us endure even the most difficult circumstances.
And that's what gives me hope,
Me too.
is knowing that even when faced with unimaginable hardship, people find ways to support each other,
Yeah.
to rebuild, and to create a better future.
It's that spirit of resilience,
Yeah.
that unwavering belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow.
It sustains us.
It really does.
Well,
Well, this deep dive has certainly been an eye-opener.
it has.
They've covered a lot of ground, from the practicalities of survival to the complexities of the human experience in wartime.
Yeah, I think we've both learned a lot.
Yeah, I hope our listeners have too.
I agree. It's been a fascinating, albeit very challenging exploration of a topic that we often shy away from.
Right.
But it's important to have these conversations to confront the realities of war
Yeah.
and to understand what it really means to be prepared.
And I think the biggest takeaway for me is that preparedness is about more than just physical survival.
Yeah.
It's about cultivating that mental and emotional resilience. It's about strengthening our communities.
Right.
And it's about holding on to hope even in the darkest of times.
Beautifully said.
And on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Okay.
What surprised you most in this deep dive? What resonated with you? And most importantly, how will you use this knowledge to build a more resilient and more compassionate world? Thank you for joining us on the deep dive. Man, we've talked about a lot of heavy stuff, everything from stockpiling supplies to the emotional toll of war.
Yeah.
And we talked a lot about, surviving during a war.
Uh-huh.
But it makes me think about what happens after?
Yeah.
How do people even start to rebuild their lives when all the fighting stops?
That's the part that always seems to get overlooked.
Right.
Like, all the survival guides just focus on getting you to the finish line.
Right, like you made it.
But then what?
Right.
And none of the sources really go into much detail about that.
Right.
But it's clear that the impact of war just lingers long after that last shot's fired.
Yeah, the Civil War source did touch upon this a bit, talking about how the soldiers struggled with, what we now call PTSD.
Oh, yeah. Post-traumatic stress disorder.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Long after they came home. And it's just a reminder that, the wounds of war run deep.
Yeah. They do?
It's not just the physical scars, but the mental and emotional ones, too.
Right. The trauma, the loss, the moral compromises people might have had to make.
Yeah.
All that can have really lasting effects.
And it goes beyond just the individual.
Yeah.
I mean, entire communities are shattered.
Right.
Families are torn apart.
Trust is broken.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you even begin to rebuild all that?
It's a monumental task.
Yeah. I mean, the physical rebuilding, like the infrastructure, the homes, the hospitals.
Yeah.
That's just the beginning.
Then you have to address all the psychological trauma.
Right.
Foster reconciliation.
And try to create some sense of hope for the future.
Exactly.
And that's where I think we as a society need to be more prepared.
Yeah.
Not just for that initial crisis, but for the long process of recovery.
It's easy to just focus on those immediate needs.
Right.
The food, the shelter, the medical care.
But you can't forget about the long-term support that people are going to need.
We need to be thinking about mental health resources. Trauma counseling, economic assistance.
Yeah, all the things that'll help people rebuild their lives and their communities.
Yeah, it's a reminder that war isn't just about survival.
Right.
It's also about rebuilding. It's about healing.
And that's something that can take generations.
It can.
It's a sobering thought, but...
It is, but I think there's also a glimmer of hope.
Okay, I like hope.
Because, throughout this whole deep dive, we've really seen the resilience of the human spirit.
Time and time again.
Yeah.
The sources emphasized, community, connection, human bonds.
That's what helps us endure.
Yeah, it helps us get through even the most difficult circumstances.
That's what gives me hope.
That's what gives me hope, too.
Knowing that even when faced with unimaginable hardship, people find ways to support each other.
Right.
To rebuild and create a better future. Yeah,
that spirit of resilience, that unwavering belief in the possibility of a better tomorrow.
It's what sustains us.
It really is. Well, this deep dive has been an eye-opener.
It has.
We've covered a lot.
So much.
From the, those practical tips for survival to the complexities of, the human experience during wartime.
It's been a fascinating but challenging look at a topic that we often like to avoid.
Yeah, it's tough, but it's important to have these conversations.
Absolutely.
You got to confront these realities and understand what it means to truly be prepared.
And I think the biggest takeaway is that preparedness is about more than just physical survival.
Right.
It's about, cultivating mental and emotional resilience.
Yes.
Strengthening our communities and holding on to that hope.
Yes, holding on to hope.
Even in the darkest of times.
Absolutely. Well, on that note, we'll leave you with a final thought.
Okay.
What surprised you most in this deep dive?
Yeah.
What resonated with you? And how will you use this knowledge to build a more resilient and more compassionate world?